most intense battles in the history of World War. Engaged a massive force of 2.5 million soldiers to eradicate the remnants of the Wehrmacht. This Soviet offensive aimed to destroy Nazi Germany once and for all. But before we begin, I ask you to click the subscribe button. Alright, let's get started. For the Soviet Union, Berlin was the main objective, as the city served as the seat of German government and the hiding place of Adolf Hitler in his bunker. If the Red Army could capture Berlin before the British and American forces, most of Central and Eastern Europe could come under communist control. For Adolf Hitler and his followers, there was a glimmer of hope that they could still defeat the Red Army at the gates of the capital. However, in reality, the Nazis' last-ditch effort, filled with hope, ended in useless and only prolonged the bloody and horrific battle. On April 16, 1945, the Soviet First Belarusian Front and the Soviet First Ukrainian Front launched their final assault on Berlin. At that time, Hitler ordered that anyone found escape in the face of the Soviet attack be arrested or shot. Since early 1945, Germany had already lost many of its occupied territories. Countries like Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria were forced to surrender and declare war on Germany. Access to enter Poland had also become relatively easy for Soviet forces. Although by February 1945, 50% of German territory had been occupied by Allied forces, and there was no hope of victory for his troops, Adolf Hitler stubbornly refused to show signs of surrender. Instead, he chose to fight to the bitter end, and dragging the country and its people into the abyss of battle. At that time, Germany had less than 1/12 of the fuel available for the needs of the Wehrmacht. Tank and aircraft production had sharply declined, and the quality of the tanks being used was inadequate. In September 1944, Joseph Goebbels, an important figure in the Nazi German government, implemented what was known as Total War. Total War referred to the full mobilization of the entire German population to support the war effort. This meant that everyone, including previously exempted workers such as those in postal services, railways, theaters, and newspapers, was pulled into the war. Goebbels wanted to ensure that everyone contributed directly or indirectly to the war effort in order to sustain the Nazi regime and fight for victory in the war. To force the Nazi leadership and high command of the army to surrender, the Allies tasked the Soviets with capturing Berlin by launching an offensive from the east. The initial step for the Soviets to take Berlin was the Battle of Seelow Heights. Seelow was a small town located in Brandenburg, northeastern Germany, near the border with Poland. It was situated just east of the B1 road, close to the Oder River. The commander of the First Belarusian Front, Marshal Georgy Zhukov, had actually been pushing back Nazi forces through Ukraine and Poland since October 1943. After months of fighting, in January 1945, he finally reached the Oder-Neisse line at Kostrzyn. The Oder-Neisse line was a natural border running along the Oder and Neisse rivers and became a crucial point in the Soviet advance towards Berlin. By reaching the Oder-Neisse line, Zhukov's forces were getting closer to their ultimate goal of capturing Berlin from the Nazi German forces. Here, Zhukov and his troops successfully held their positions on the floodplains of the Oder River, which were only 70 kilometers away from Alexanderplatz in Berlin. Before attacking Berlin, Zhukov maintained his defensive stance while waiting for other Soviet military units to spread out to the north and south in order to fully encircle Berlin. Continuing on April 16, 1945, the Soviets had supplied enough and adequate forces. The Red Army had completed cleansing operations in the eastern territories and was preparing for the final assault on the German capital. On the other side, the German Ninth Army, led by General Theodor Bussy, consisted of Hitler Youth members who were poorly armed and Volkssturm fighters who were untrained. They had prepared defenses along a series of hills stretching from north to south, with a height of approximately 90 meters above the Oder River floodplains, and the central defensive point was at Seelow. This area was the last natural stronghold that could protect Berlin from the east. With higher ground above the Oder floodplains, the hills provided a tactical advantage for the German forces in resisting enemy attacks. When the attack began before sunrise, the Red Army used searchlights typically used on airport runways to illuminate the battlefield. They hoped that the light would blind their opponents, but due to fog in the morning, the searchlights instead made the Red Army infantry appear as shadows. Contrary to their expectations, their task turned out to be much more difficult than anticipated. The battle lasted for days and resulted in heavy casualties on both sides, for both the Red Army and the opposing forces. It was only after 2 days of fighting that the Soviet forces managed to break through the Germans' third defensive line at Silo, and from then on, there were not many obstacles impeding their progress until they reached the outskirts of Berlin. From April 18 to 23, several significant events began to unfold. On April 18, Joseph Goebbels burned important documents in his office as Soviet forces approached. Afterward, he and his wife moved to Hitler's bunker. They poisoned their children and themselves, committing suicide. On April 21, Soviet infantry forces reached Berlin, and Adolf Hitler ordered a full-scale counterattack against the Soviet forces in Berlin under the command of SS General Felix Steiner. On April 22, the Soviet First Belarusian Front successfully penetrated the outskirts of Berlin from the east and north. Adolf Hitler, upon learning that the counterattack he had ordered the previous day had not been carried out by General Steiner, became enraged. When informed by Wilhelm Keitel that Soviet tanks had entered the city, Hitler realized that the end was near and decided to burn important documents stored in the bunker and stay in Berlin. His hope and morale dwindled further. Every day, civilians were subjected to continuous air raids and long-range mortar attacks. On the surface, close-quarter battles occurred as German soldiers, particularly the SS, fought to the death defending streets and houses. Numerous casualties were suffered, including children, women, and the elderly. Some SS units also massacred German civilians whom they considered to be Allied spies or who refused to participate in the fighting. During the battle in Berlin, conditions in the shelters worsened by the hour. Shelter locations, such as bunkers and basements, became places where civilians sought refuge from the attacks and dangers above ground. However, due to increasingly apprehensive conditions, these places are becoming very unfit to live in. A tank driver of the Red Army, Alexander Shalamatov, said, "On the morning of April 23, our team, reinforced by units from the 29th Guards Motor Rifle Brigade, continued the attack towards Stahnsdorf. Our task was to cross the Teltow Canal and seize the southwest outskirts of Berlin. On the night of April 24, our team successfully overcame fierce resistance from German forces and reached the southern outskirts of Berlin. Despite encountering heavy counterattacks, by the evening of the following day, we managed to capture the railway station and the Lichterfeld area. On April 26, our team successfully captured the Schmargendorf area and in the afternoon reached the Charlottenburg district. Later that evening, our brigade was ordered to turn around 180 degrees and advance towards Potsdam. On April 25, 1945, as the battle raged on, the Red Army continued its advance into Berlin from all directions. Many of Hitler's subordinates lost hope of victory and focused more on their survival. During the war, Karstadt am Hermannplatz, which was once the largest and most modern department store in Europe, was used as a food warehouse and also as Hitler's military clothing agency. The German soldiers at the time wanted to destroy the store because if the enemy took over the building, it would be easy for them to shoot down from the elevated position. Civilian residents who had come to seek food supplies inside the building were all forced out, and the building was eventually demolished. On April 25, 1945, forces from the First Belarusian Front and the First Ukrainian Front met near Kietzen to complete the encirclement of Berlin. About 70 kilometers to the south, American and Soviet forces met in Torgau. Before committing suicide, on April 28, 1945, Hitler married his lover, Eva Braun, inside the bunker. The following day, Hitler composed and signed his will, in which he appointed Admiral Karl Donitz as his successor as President of Germany and leader of the Reich. On April 30, 1945, Adolf Hitler died by suicide in his bunker, known to have shot himself in the head. His body was burned in the Reich Chancellery Garden along with Eva Braun. In the Tiergarten district, Zhukov launched a larger assault, refusing to grant a ceasefire and demanding unconditional surrender. On May 1, 1945, the Battle of Halby began as Soviet forces pushed German troops back from Berlin towards the River Elbe. Germany attempted to initiate negotiations with U.S. forces. One day later, on May 2, 1945, the Red Army raised the Soviet Union's hammer and sickle flag atop the Reichstag building in Berlin. On May 8, General Helmuth Weidling accepted the terms of unconditional surrender proposed by General Vasily Chukov. The surrender of the Berlin garrison in Germany took effect at 3 p.m. On this date, all Wehrmacht forces surrendered unconditionally. May 8 is now recognized worldwide as Victory in Europe Day. Thank you for watching and paying attention to this video. We hope this video has been beneficial to you, and if you liked it, please share it with your friends. See you in the next video.